Good afternoon, everybody. Today, the government of Libya announced the death of Muammar Gaddafi.
On the 20th of October 2011, Africa came to a stand when it was announced that Libyan President Colonel Muammar Gaddafi had died. The news of his death caused a lot of controversy on the African continent, with several versions as to what led to his death. In this video, we shall be telling you about the African president who enabled and orchestrated the assassination of Gaddafi. You see, Gaddafi had a lot of ambitious plans for the African continent. He was a no-nonsense leader who feared no one and constantly called out the West on their bullshit. He had one dream for Africa: to unite and form the United States of Africa.
A continent with one army, one passport, one currency, called the Afro.
During his reign as president, he had strict policies and might have stepped on a few toes, and one of those toes happens to be someone whom he loved and considered his bosom friend. You might be asking who that person we are talking about is. Well, we are talking about the current president of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni. Museveni was the African leader who betrayed Muammar Gaddafi. But what happened, and how did he betray Gaddafi? Well, grab a seat and subscribe to the channel. The beginning of a beautiful friendship. The relationship between Gaddafi and Museveni started way back. In the 1970s and early 1980s, both Museveni and Gaddafi were part of a group of African leaders who were trying to promote Pan-Africanism and reduce Western influence on the continent. Gaddafi was one of the most vocal proponents of this movement and provided financial and military support to several African countries, including Uganda. In 1979, Gaddafi supported Museveni's National Resistance Army, NRA, in its fight against the government of Milton Obote. Milton Obote had a pro-Western regime, so Gaddafi, who fought against Western policies and interference, hated Milton Obote. When the time came for an opposition regime in Uganda, Gaddafi saw it as an opportunity to lend his support. Gaddafi provided training and military equipment to Museveni NRA, including weapons and ammunition. Gaddafi also allowed Museveni and his supporters to use Libyan territory as a base of operations, and he provided them with ideological and political support. Gaddafi's support for the NRA was part of his broader strategy of promoting Pan-Africanism and reducing Western influence on the continent. After a successful rebellion against Milton Obote's government, Museveni eventually became the president. After Museveni came to power in 1986, Gaddafi was the first African president to visit him. Their friendship became even stronger, and Museveni maintained close ties with Gaddafi and Libya. Museveni visited Libya several times, and Gaddafi also visited Uganda. During one of his visits, Gaddafi met with Museveni and other Ugandan officials and discussed a wide range of issues, including Pan-Africanism, economic cooperation, and the struggle against imperialism and colonialism. Gaddafi's visit to Uganda was significant because it marked a turning point in Uganda's relations with Libya and other countries in the region. Under Museveni, Uganda began to shift away from the pro-Western policies of previous governments and towards a more Pan-Africanist and non-aligned foreign policy. Gaddafi's visit helped to cement this new relationship and set the stage for increased cooperation between Uganda and Libya in the years to come. After Gaddafi's visit, Uganda and Libya signed several agreements in areas such as trade, investment, and defense. Everything moved on smoothly between Gaddafi and Museveni until things went south. Greed and betrayal. The relationship between Yoweri Museveni and Muammar Gaddafi began to strain in the 2000s. One major point of contention was Gaddafi's support for various rebel movements in Africa, which put him at odds with Museveni's efforts to promote stability in the region. In particular, Museveni was strongly opposed to Gaddafi's support for the Lord's Resistance Army, LRA, a rebel group that waged a brutal insurgency in northern Uganda for over 2 decades. In 2005, the International Criminal Court indicted LRA leader Joseph Kony and several other commanders for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Museveni welcomed the ICC's intervention and called on Gaddafi to stop supporting the LRA. However, Gaddafi continued to provide support to the group, which strained relations between Uganda and Libya. Another point of contention was Gaddafi's push for the United States of Africa, which Museveni viewed as unrealistic and potentially destabilizing. In 2007, Gaddafi proposed a plan to create a single African government with a common currency and army, but the plan was not widely supported by other African leaders, including Museveni. Museveni thought Gaddafi would be the president of a united Africa, and he did not want to lose his status as president, so he declined the proposal and joined others to fight Gaddafi. During one of his numerous visits to the US, Museveni discussed Gaddafi with the US and called on them to intervene with the support Gaddafi was giving some anti-Western rebel groups. Things escalated when Yoweri Museveni, the president of Uganda, supported the NATO-led intervention in Libya in 2011 that ultimately led to the ouster and death of Muammar Gaddafi. Museveni's support for the intervention was based on several factors. Firstly, Museveni was a strong supporter of the principle of responsibility to protect R2P, which holds that the international community has a responsibility to intervene in cases where a government is unable or unwilling to protect its citizens from mass atrocities. Museveni believed that the Libyan government's violent crackdown on protesters in 2011 constituted such a case. Secondly, Museveni had long been critical of Gaddafi's support for rebel movements in Africa, including the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda. By supporting the NATO-led intervention, Museveni saw an opportunity to weaken Gaddafi's influence in the region and potentially bring an end to the LRA insurgency. Finally, Museveni believed that the intervention was justified under international law, as it was authorized by the United Nations Security Council under Resolution 1973. Museveni argued that the intervention was not an act of aggression, but rather a legitimate effort to protect civilians and promote stability in the region. It is worth noting, however, that Museveni's support for the intervention was not universally popular in Uganda or the wider African continent. Some critics argued that the intervention set a dangerous precedent for external military intervention in African affairs, while others accused Museveni of being overly deferential to Western powers. In 2011, Museveni supported the NATO-led intervention in Libya that ultimately led to Gaddafi's ouster and death. While Museveni did not publicly criticize Gaddafi at the time, his support for the intervention signaled a significant shift in Uganda's relations with Libya and the wider region. Overall, the relationship between Museveni and Gaddafi was characterized by periods of cooperation and disagreement, with the two leaders sharing a common goal of promoting Pan-Africanism, but differing on the means to achieve this goal: the assassination of Gaddafi. After 4 decades of ruling Libya, Libya plunged into a civil war in 2011, which was orchestrated by the West in association with several African leaders, including Museveni. Muammar Gaddafi was killed on October 20, 2011, during the final stages of the Libyan civil war. Gaddafi had ruled Libya for over 4 decades, but his regime was overthrown by a popular uprising. After losing control of the capital, Tripoli, in August 2011, Gaddafi went into hiding with a small group of loyalists. On October 20, 2011, Gaddafi and his entourage were discovered by NATO-led rebel forces near the town of Sirte, Gaddafi's hometown. A firefight broke out, and Gaddafi was reportedly wounded in the leg. Gaddafi and his entourage then attempted to flee in a convoy of vehicles, but they were pursued by NATO airstrikes and rebel forces. One of the vehicles in the convoy was hit by a missile, and Gaddafi was reportedly captured alive by rebel forces. Video footage of the aftermath of the capture shows a bloodied and disoriented Gaddafi being dragged through the streets by rebel fighters. He was then reportedly taken to a nearby hotel, where he died from his injuries. The exact circumstances of Gaddafi's death remain unclear, and there are conflicting accounts of what happened. Some reports suggest that Gaddafi was executed by rebel forces, while others suggest that he was killed in the crossfire during the firefight. The Libyan authorities have launched investigations into the incident, but as of my knowledge, no definitive conclusions have been reached. Since the death of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, Libya has experienced significant political instability and violence. Following the end of the civil war, Libya was ruled by a transitional government that struggled to establish stability and security across the country. In particular, the government was unable to disarm the various militias and armed groups that had emerged during the civil war, leading to ongoing violence and insecurity. In 2014, a new conflict broke out between rival factions vying for control of the country. The conflict has been characterized by fighting between various armed groups, including militias, Islamist militants, and other factions. The conflict has also been fueled by regional and tribal rivalries, as well as the involvement of foreign powers. The United Nations has been involved in efforts to broker a peace agreement between the warring factions, culminating in the creation of a Government of National Accord, GNA, in 2015. However, the GNA has struggled to establish full control over the country, and rival factions continue to vie for power and influence. In recent years, there have been some positive developments, such as the establishment of a ceasefire in October 2020 and the appointment of a new interim government in March 2021. However, the situation remains fragile, and there are ongoing concerns about the presence of extremist groups in the country and the proliferation of weapons. Many Africans argue that Gaddafi had good intentions for the African continent, while others argue that he did it out of greed and wanted to be the supreme leader of a united Africa. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section. Today, Museveni is still the president of Africa, and his regime is currently very unpopular because he has held on to power for more than 36 years. Thanks for watching this video, and let's continue the conversation in the comments. Please do not forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends.